Hi again, everyone. Welcome. This seminar is on the topic of male survivors of sexual abuse, context, intersectionality, and therapy. I'm going to hand over in a second, but just wanting to say, of course, this topic is something that can be quite emotive and just wanting to make sure that everyone really takes care of themselves. If you need, just drop any of us a message, myself, Mick, or John, and we are open to have a chat. But otherwise, we really encourage as much engagement as possible. I think this seminar is going to be great because it's meant to be quite relational, interactive. And yeah, I think it's nice to have something a bit different from just being spoken at. So really looking forward to it. Wesley just popped into the chat. If you have any issues with tech, just send a message over to him. So thank you so much, Wesley. And just wanting to remind everyone of our sort of chat rules, which is essentially just be nice to each other and treat each other with kindness and respect, especially given the fact that this is a sensitive topic. I think we just want to make sure that we're all creating a safe enough environment, knowing that we can't guarantee safety, but that we are aiming for it. So I'm going to hand over to Jeremy and Olu now to just go for it. So yeah, thank you both so much for coming and spending your time with us here at Task.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Cassandra. I'm just gonna. Good. So now I can see everybody. To echo what you've already said, thank you so much to everybody who's signed up to join us for this 60 minutes. I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to introduce Olumide, a colleague of mine, to introduce himself. And what we thought we would do is, because Olumide is one of the critical friends who has read a few chapters of the book while it was in development. And we also have peer supervision, so he's seen most of the tears from trying to write the book. So I thought no better person could I think of to sort of come up with questions and ask about it. So, but I'll be very brief. So my name is Jeremy Sachs. I'm a therapist. I'm based in Glasgow. I'm also the director of the trauma diploma at the NAOS Institute in London, and I've written a book, and here's the book, but we knew this. But yes, thank you again for everybody being here. Ollie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So, hi everyone. My name's Olumide Ajulo. Please feel free to call me Olu. I am a psychotherapist that works and manages a service at Leeds Beckett University. I also work privately. And as Jeremy said, we do peer supervision together. And I had the honor, and I'll call it an honor, to be one of the critical friends. And I love to see that we've got quite a number of people here. I'm just as excited to be able to talk about this book. I think it's a really important subject. I work with a lot of men. Not only in my private practice, but also I work with student age. And so this book is so critical and so timely in what's going on sort of with men at the moment. And it's a really difficult and sensitive subject. So the bits that I've read have been so good. And so just the chance to talk about it with Jeremy and for you all to hear it. I think the plan is we'll sort of treat this a bit like peer supervision. So it's almost like you get to see how we work together, but also a chance for you to ask questions, and sort of we'll try and keep track of questions that are being asked. I've got some questions that I want to ask him for a chance for you to get to know him a bit, as well as his process of writing. So I think we'll just get straight into the questions.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
to be completely and utterly cheesy, the first question is, what inspired you to write this book?
Um, it's not cheesy at all. I think I really like the question because you know, I ran groups for male survivors for years. Um, and the after the first 2 years of running them, and they were supposed to be sort of holistic groups. They were supposed to be so the groups focused on a small amount of psychoeducation. A lot of groups are very heavily psychoeducation, so we wanted to do a small amount of psychoeducation, a big chunk of processing and a good chunk of peer-to-peer led sort of knowledge exchange, you know. So after 2 years of running it and it went well and it formed sort of these really kind of lovely, beautiful relationships that were sort of thriving, as well as some of the inevitable challenges you'd imagine. We expanded it to young boys who were 13 plus and to trans non-binary community who accessed the organization I worked for back then. And one of the really astonishing things was, you know, the sessions were closed groups. They ran for 12 sessions across 3 months, more or less. And the same topics came up over and over again. And this is just under a decade of work, the same topics came up. And while exploring the same topics, hearing different voices and different takes on these topics just felt so kind of electric and in depth and informed and relational and emotional, and just say, well, I just don't see this sort of level of the opportunity to metabolize all of these different ideas and perspectives on the same topic. So what it really did was set a structure for a book. This is, you know, here were 12 topics coming up over and over again. So here we have 12 chapters and we have such rich information. So the information in the pages is it's so palpable. I hope I've done a good enough job for the survivors who have informed it, you know, and I've asked different survivors to introduce each chapter, you know, and what that means to them, so their voices are in there. But yeah, it just made so much sense to put this into a book, this sort of untapped knowledge, and not just knowledge, but a reflection of experience that doesn't get talked about. And we know the benefits of seeing one's experience reflected back, and there just seemed a real deficit of this sort of wisdom out there. So it was a really easy do it. It's not easy to do it, but to decide to do it was like, well, this should happen.
And I think that really comes through in the book, that it really has a relational feel. One of the ways that you and I, where we meet in our practice, is we're both very relational, and we both really value psychoeducation. Where I think we sometimes differ is I have a behavioral element, and I work within the university in a short-term model.
Mhm.
So as I'm reading, I'm thinking, right, how can I use this in my private practice with clients I work with on a longer term with different ages, but also how can I condense this into a 3 session model, 6 session model that really you can get the meat
Mm,
from the work, you know, because with stuff like this, if you haven't got long-term opportunity, it can be very dangerous to open this stuff up. So what bits can we glean?
mm,
And I think that really comes across, that you are really looking to provide people with different tools. So I
mm.
think that really comes across. Um, Sort of leading on from what you just said, um, the next question is, what was the most challenging part of writing the book? Whether that be a particular chapter, what came up for you in terms of like your own personal experience of writing it, and or feedback that you may have received. What came up in you, and what did you find most challenging in writing this book?
Well, I found your feedback the most challenging. Thank you very much. I think there's several different ways we could go with that, right? So I think it's, you know, I don't mind saying this. I was in therapy straight for about 7 years, you know, and finished 2 years ago in November. So was writing this book not in therapy. And when it came to the shame chapter, and shame being such a pervasive experience for survivors, I would say such a powerful experience for men. I think shame certainly has a gendered lens, not to diminish its experience for women. I'm not saying it's less, I'm saying there could be an argument for it being different. When it got to that chapter, I thought, well, I've had all of my 7 years of therapy, I've got this. And then, experience nightmares and sort of sensory flashbacks and being irritable and all this sort of stuff that was coming out just from sitting with this incredibly corrosive emotion
Mm.
day after day, writing it while still having a private practice and doing that. So it really surprised me. It really caught me off guard that, and this lesson I think is incredibly valuable for when working with something like sexual violence, because there was me going, well, I've worked in this for a decade. I've had a robust amount of therapy myself, and I was ill prepared to sit in this space where I was exposed to this what I would argue relational and difficult emotion. And there is a universe where I might not have noticed it. I might not have, I might just have been irritable and be
Mm.
having a really bad time and not so join the dots. And so I do wonder, you know, how many times do we as practitioners sit with something that actually we don't know why that's sort of irritating or, or sort of
Yeah.
getting under the skin. So that was very challenging. I think the other thing that to sort of lead onto your feedback was stuff around gender and masculinity.
Mm.
I wrote a chapter on masculinity, and what I don't want the book to do is be an angry book. I want it to represent appropriate anger at some of the systemic violence, systemic barriers different men face when trying to access support for this. But I don't, and this isn't to diminish anger. Anger is a very appropriate response to this topic.
Mm.
But I wanted the book to say, yes, there is anger, but yes, there is also connectivity and all of the themes that I really believe help this kind of help the recovery of this kind of experience. So I was writing this chapter on masculinity, and you and some other people were like, what is this anger in
Mm.
this chapter? And again, there was my own stuff around masculinity, my own stuff around, being raised raised in a home with a certain style of masculinity that just never aided me, and it
Mm.
was coming out on the page, and it was your comment. I think you were like, there's nothing wrong here with traditional masculinity, and you seem
Yeah.
angry with that. And I really needed to go away and think about it and think about how I wrote that chapter.
Yeah.
So I think that, some of the challenges, the personal challenges of just going, wow, it really showed me some of the vulnerabilities that perhaps I was unaware of as I went into
Mm.
the book, and I come out of it still a work in progress, but having a lot more awareness of where these pain points are for me.
And I think it's important for people to know that I've gotten to know you quite well. So when you are relational, you are so thoughtful, you have this ability to see things from different angles. So when there was an obvious angle it felt like this is being missed on purpose. um, because it's just that's not like you.
Hmm.
And so I work with a lot of men, and the phrase toxic masculinity has been thrown around a lot. And I work with a lot of men that respect women, respect different sexualities and different genders and different races, and they have more of what would be classed as a traditional view on things. And one of the things that you said you wanted this book to be was any man can find themselves.
Yeah.
And even in some of the examples you were giving, I was like, wait, there's no example
Mm.
of what would be classed as a more traditional view. And therefore, there's going to be a whole group of men that go, this isn't for me.
Mm,
And actually, they experience abuse, they experience sexual attacks. And actually, then if there's a whole group, what are we perpetuating? Are you saying you aren't valued? But and I know that's not what you're saying. I knew there was something else going on. I thought it was important to tease that out. And you were so receptive to it. I noticed not prickle, I don't want to say prickle, but something was rubbed. And we sat with it, and you went away and thought about it, and you came back and actively changed it. And that anger, that what was coming out as anger towards a group of people, smoothed out and gave a much fuller chapter where people could find themselves. And I thought that was a really important part of the process. That um and I think there's a parts work in all of this. How many people, when people are abused, cut off a part of themselves?
mm, mm,
How many people who may not have been abused but actually had real difficulties with men have cut off a part of themselves? And so, actually, to be able to bring it all back and have a book that says it's okay to be all of you is so important. And I think you really wrestled with that and came back with something that gave that message.
Thank you. And yeah, I really owe you for that insight, because it would break my heart if I felt I'd written a book that somebody would pick up and feel they couldn't access. And that's so interesting, that internal sort of splitting off a part of yourself. Because what we see in groups of male survivors, you will hear men say, well, in social situations, I'll find a woman to hide behind because I don't know how to interact with men, or I don't, or men are threatening, or I just don't know how to be around men. So there's an it in we how big we could make that example in the writing. There was something that I didn't want to look at
Mm.
internally, perhaps, as something I didn't want to look at, and then for the male survivors' experience externally, we see this other thing of going, well, I don't know how to talk to men in the pub, so I'm going to sit with the women, which is in of itself is fine, but then we unpick what that is like for men and what that means for masculinity and what that means for them socially, and all of the complexities there. So yeah.
There's a couple of questions that have come up, but I thought there was two that were really interesting, and I thought actually is kind of tying with what we're talking about. The first one was, and I think this is for you, and I think the second one, maybe both of us answer it. Why was it important for you to have the lived experience representation at the beginning of each chapter? So I'll
Mhm.
let you answer that first, and then we'll go to the second question.
That's a lovely question. I think, you know, um, so much of the wisdom of the book is from survivors, and I choose to disclose little bits, and maybe we'll talk about that later, but not a lot at all. I I think there's something so important about survivors' voices in this book, from how the chapters were picked because of the groups, but also explicitly saying, here are men's voices, and they're introducing each chapter. I also think there's an intersectional argument for why do that, because we know in the umbrella of sexual violence and abuse, men's stories and voices are heard very infrequently. And then within that smaller umbrella, we know that voices of men from different communities are heard even less. So what I've done with the testimonies, I've said to lots of different people, do you want to give over a testimony? Yes. How would you like to be identified in the book? And some people have said, I'd like to remain anonymous. Some people have said, well, my identity to me is about my working classness, or my identity is about my being a young man, or mine's about being trans or Jewish, or that, so just it's a small platform, but I hope it is a platform to not just hear lots of different voices of men, but we also start to realize the commonality that there is more to connect us than what divides us, particularly in this kind of experience. So that felt like just such a valuable opportunity. If this is going to get printed and some people might read it, let's elevate those stories that can
Yeah,
really show my God, we can learn from each other.
yeah. And I think it's also important that by you giving them the choice and them being able to be identified the way they want to be, it's part of that therapeutic process of them gaining their power back. They get a choice because what sexual violence does, it takes away someone's power, it takes away someone's choice. But actually they get to speak up. It starts with you. It
Mm,
doesn't start with the professional or the expert telling you about you. It starts with you. And I think that's so important.
mm.
um, the other question, which I think maybe both of us can answer, do you think your therapy training prepared you to hold shame? Do we address this enough in training, in your opinion?
Oh, I mean, I don't know about all training, but like, I don't think shame was mentioned at all in my training. I don't think so. Certainly not to the point of me remembering. Um, and my next book is all about shame, because I think it's such an incredibly powerful emotion that is felt on a personal level, on an interpersonal level, and even on a geopolitical level. If we're looking to find a lens to which to explain some of the real toxicity and violence that we see around us socially, I think shame is a good lens to start looking at that with. So I think whether we're interested in relationships, in gender and masculinity, in an experience like trauma, or if we're interested in sort of socio-political developments in the world, I think shame is absolutely integral. And I mean, maybe somebody mentioned shame, but I don't remember at all,
Mm,
really. And I think it is, perhaps not the time to get into it, but when you look at the shame or the compass of shame, and you see sort of the way shame can be directed outwards, inwards, how it's got real violence in it, whether it's violence towards, as survivors, if it's violence towards oneself, be it through sort of substances, compulsive sexual disorders, self-harming, or whether it's violence outwards, whether it is violence within relationships, whether it is social violence, whether it is online culture. I think shame, it becomes this weapon to try and, you know, harm, push, defend.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, how about you?
Uh,
What about your training?
yeah, so my training, it was briefly talked about, but I think what's not talked about is not just the shame of the client, but the shame of the practitioner. And actually, it was so funny. As soon as you started talking about violence, I got this, me and my imagery. I work a lot with imagery, of a therapist and a client in a boxing match. The
Mm,
client shame and the therapist shame boxing at each other. And actually, if shame isn't something that we talk about, um, it can become a weapon. And I also think we have to be careful, because this is a question I've heard sort of as I do different things. And there's some things you can't learn until you are qualified and you are on the road and you're doing it because um, you can't be prepared for everything. And I think sometimes as trainees, we were like, well, I want to be prepared for every eventuality. And that's just not possible. Actually, sometimes you have to be in the room and go, oh, I don't know how I'm going to react to that.
mhm.
Or things you didn't know you had shame about. Someone says something. I've had that experience, and we've talked about some of my experiences where, my goodness, a client said something innocuous and it erupted something in
Yeah,
me because
yeah.
there was an area I hadn't thought about. And so I think there's more that can be done in training, I'm sure, but there's also that post-training experience where you learn on the job, and it's about making sure you have those peer relationships, those therapeutic relationships, and just be open to self-examination as well as when you're working relationally, notice what's happening. Wait, what? Oh, the language has changed. I'm hearing something else going on. What's going on here? And for us to continue to be curious so that we can pick up on shame as quickly as possible, because it erodes, and if we don't, it can erode the therapeutic relationship to the point that it can't be repaired. So I think yes, there's training things that can be done, but a lot of our experience is gained in the field, I think.
I mean, I agree, and I think it's sort of to pull it back to survivors as well.
Yes.
What you've just said, the sort of the boxing and the stuff that erupts in you, makes me think also another thing we perhaps are not prepared for is what victimhood looks like in men.
Mm,
When I think of sh different shame responses, particularly in the context of sexual abuse, and I think of
mm,
men I work with, and out there in the world, how we receive men, it doesn't always look like a classic victim, a man, uh, you know, uh, because I think there's a certain sense of the patriarchy not really allowing sort of a victim role for men, so they don't have a lot of space to go. So a man who, punches a wall doesn't look like a victim. In fact, I might be quite frightened of him. I might
mm,
really avoid him. But
mm,
that is an expression of victimhood. A man sitting opposite me, I think of sort of Beyond's attacks in link or attacks on linking. So when you sort of link something in the therapy, go, well, is this pain today? Could it be connected to something? And sort of men are up and go, no, absolutely not. This is just, and this you're talking nonsense, and then sort of withhold payment or don't turn up for the next session, and you find yourself going, for goodness sake, just I need you to pay me, or I need you to pay
yeah.
me if you're not going to be here. And, you know, and that can be a marker of victimhood. That can be them communicating to you how they felt. But you end up going, oh, well, for good, useless, for, not ready for therapy.
Mm,
Hold on, maybe you're missing something as a therapist in the room, and maybe shame, wonky expressions of victimhood are coming out because of gender, because of sort of patriarchal systems, and we
mm,
just miss those sorts of things. So I think that awareness of shame, that awareness of how it can come out in all sorts of directions, that awareness of what victimhood looks like, so important because actually things like that definitely designed to push us away, definitely designed. Anyway, it's yeah, I
no, it's
go
really.
on about that.
And it's funny what you were talking about. It's led me to think of another question. It wasn't one of the ones I planned. Um, we talk about, right, what happens in the room. So I work online, I also work in person. I am a black man, I'm 6'6", I'm no 22 stone, I go to the gym. Me sat with a man who has experienced sexual abuse, a woman sat with a man who's experienced sexual abuse. Like, so you're going to get different therapists sitting with someone, and it may bring different things. So I work with transference because of my size, because of my
Mm.
skin color, because of many things. People can sometimes just have a reaction to me as soon as I sit down. So it's helpful therapeutically because it can get to things. But also, I found I've clients where that is a really difficult subject because in the world, he says, I can overpower them. And
Mhm.
so, how do you start to talk about that? How do you start to engage with power dynamics when either one party feels powerless, the other party can look powerful? Like, how do and so I'm really curious about that in the process of writing the book, where power dynamics, where physicality, where gender, sort of where all that plays a role in the book.
Well, I mean, it does, and I don't want to answer your question with the question, but
Yeah.
so I hear in some of the sort of transference or countertransference, you're aware of the sort of physical difference and what
Yeah.
that might do, and yet these clients are still coming back.
Mm.
So what are you what are you doing that is also signaling I might not be whatever they're projecting, right? Like the threat or
Yeah.
the expert or the, whatever it is. What do you think
Mhm.
people are doing that is slipping under perhaps the big projection and saying you can come back, you can take a
Interesting.
risk.
Just to note to people, this is what Jeremy does. He's so good. He thinks around. But no, that's a really good question. I think um, the feedback that I've had is there is something quite fatherly about the way I practice.
Mhm.
And I think there is a way what people are trying to do is repair something with me.
Right.
Um, Either a relationship with a parent, a relationship with either their own masculinity or connection to the community. And I think often that's why people come back. That there is the feedback I've had is that even though I have my size, I don't look to fill the room. I'm very comfortable in my skin. I'm
Hmm.
not looking to be forceful. And I think there's something they feel quite safe about that. So I think that that's my personal experience. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's really helpful, actually, sort of what, and maybe to sort of widen that out. I'm thinking for practitioners here, doesn't matter what your gender is, what your size is, there is reparative work that can be done, and something transferential could be happening. And as long as we use our supervision correctly and we get that support, actually, the difference can be quite helpful. I've heard you say this on a number of interviews, talking about needing to have shared experiences with your therapist or not having shared experiences with your therapist. I think that's where the relational work is really helpful. That actually it's not about whether you share experiences, it's what's happening between you in the room at that moment and what you're
Yeah.
both bringing. And so I think that's a really important aspect that there's no one, this book's for everyone. No matter what your gender is, what your way of practicing is, there's something for you that you can take into your practice.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting because you know, working across difference, I think there's something over here about the blank canvas that I find really difficult and perhaps oppressive sometimes. And then over here, this over relating that for me feels sticky. I don't want
Yeah.
to sort of send out a sign about my identity and say, if you match my identity, come and we can work together. Because I think that sort of ignores the fact that therapy should be challenging, and some
Mm,
challenging is the difference. So what I think I want the book to do is not be written in the tone that says, I totally get you, though I do want people to find their experiences within the book. I think, in the therapy room, I'm much more interested in clients knowing that they can have an impact on me. It's not about me going, oh, we're kind of the same. It's about going, your experience and your emotions have an impact on me. You have affected me, and I want you to know that.
mm,
I want you to, if you have suffered a trauma that you have not dared say to anybody, you have said
mm,
it to me, and I take it seriously.
yeah.
I have had reactions to it, and I hope that's kind of what the book does. Yes, strive to say, here's the commonality, but also to say, the book takes your experience seriously, because
Mm,
what to sort of bring it back to things we hear from men a lot is about men will sit in sort of two camps, not to be reductive, and obviously there's lots of other camps, but either it was a long time ago, it's no big deal, I'm going to diminish these things. And of course, we see this across healthcare. Ask GPs, and men will, if they end up in the GP surgery, either sort of diminish symptoms or not talk about symptoms, and that can be a really difficult position for men to take. Or conversely, really say no one could understand the pain I've been in.
Mm.
I have suffered the worst pain and no one could understand me. So these positions are extremely difficult, I think, for me. So this is why I think the book on that note goes, yes, there's some commonality, but your experience is really valid and heard and impactful. I feel I've sort of wandered off topic, but I'm
No,
not.
no, no. This is what we do, and so I want to go to um uh intersectionality, and I want to take a different angle. I was originally going to talk about something, but I just want to ask a question that someone's come up with, and I think it'd be good um to talk about it between us as peer supervision. Talking about the idea of shame of the therapist, how much space have you both found to explore this in supervision, and what do you think are important ingredients in the supervisory relationship and therapy room to facilitate exploration of shame? I thought that
Oh,
was quite a good question.
no, I really like it. I really like it. My pause has fed it feels like a big question.
Yeah. What shall I go first?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. I immediately, I think you and I together have been quite good at exploring some things. And I think what I found is that when someone notices, so sometimes shame, we don't want to engage with it um, because it feels so big. But actually, when someone caringly and gently in a safe way notices, that's an invitation for the shame to be shared. So I think in the supervisory relationship, if you have a strong relationship with your supervisor or you have a strong relationship with some peers, if you do peer supervision as well, I think that's a really great way to explore. So I've had different things I've felt shame about. And at points Jeremy's gone, oh, what's going on here? I've noticed your tone's changed. Like what weight is there on this? And it's given me time to explore. And then I've noticed, oh, wait, that's what's going on with that client between me and the client.
Hmm.
Their stuff's coming out and my stuff's coming out. And it allows me to adjust or just go into the room aware that that's happening. And so I found the exploration really helpful in my relationship with you, but also in my relationship with my clinical supervisor as well. And I think if we, that relational aspect with our supervisors, um, where things are noticed, that's a really helpful way, I think.
Yeah, I think I would expand on that too, because I think noticing shame and supervision, that's often, for me at least, really good information about our clients.
Yes.
I find uh, clients I have who are very shame prone, or clients, and I want to use clinical language really sparingly because again, it doesn't sit comfortably with me. But if we think of sort of a borderline adaptation where somebody is really going right the way through the spectrum of emotions quickly and fast and painfully, all
Mm,
of the shame that they cannot contain, they will put into me.
mm,
They will take this from me.
mm.
And my God, with not all of it, but with some people that can be so impactful.
Yeah.
That could be, and so to come to supervision and go, I feel beaten up. I feel like a punch bag. I feel squashed by this person and not be able to really get, and then for the supervisor to hold that using all of the things I think you said, Olu, to sort of be gentle, curious, safe, and then be able to digest it and metabolize it and say, oh, this client is showing me like 2% of how they've been made to feel.
Mm,
They're really showing me how utterly wretched they can feel because they've really put this in me. And I think lots of emotions do that. I think shame, is one of the ones that is so relational. It just it jumps, a shame somebody feels from 20 years ago can time travel and find its way to the present, finds itself in the therapy room. Then I come to you, Olu, and then I say, "Oh God, I feel this," and then suddenly it's with you and you're feeling your shame. I mean, it's so hard to contain.
Yeah,
So I think supervision, the opportunity to contain, make safe, and then understand. And
yeah,
it's why this client is doing this.
because they can't, they've felt that embodied experience of being shoved away or being crushed or
Yeah.
being ignored. And so they only know how to do that towards you. And actually, by using supervision and I want to use this carefully, being that adult in the room
Mm.
and going, right, I recognize this is happening. I'm not going to do that back.
Mm.
Let's sit with this. I'm a safe person to sit with this, and I'm
Yeah.
not going to crush you. I'm not going to push you down. I'm not going, but I've gone away and done the work and
Yeah.
recognize what's going on. So
But
I
I,
think that's another. Sorry, go on. No, no, please,
no,
please.
no, now I'm talking over you because I'm excited because I agree with what you're saying. But I think the challenge, particularly for you and I who are relational therapists, I don't know about you, but to be relational, I need my inner child to be in the room, to be listening, to be going, what's happening? You
And
know?
that child sometimes is like, nope, I want nothing to do with this.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
so that difficult, and 9 times out of 10, it's like it's a tool that it's the inner child is a sort of a receptor for what's going on, and we can go,
yeah,
oh, we can play, or we can put on these different roles, we can, free child, all of this stuff. But when it's shameful, we're showing our inner child some real harm, or potentially real, not obviously not with all clients,
yeah,
some real harm. And that is and that's why the supervision is so important, because we're not
exactly.
just going, oh, I feel steamrolled.
Yeah,
We're going, gosh, the conductor that is my inner child has been attacked. And
yeah.
goodness knows that's difficult to untangle in the room. Yeah.
Yeah, there's I've thoughts are going, but I'm gonna steer us away from that. But
Sure.
I'll probably have that more of this conversation later. I was thinking about intersectionality. One of the things we talked about was the different, like when we talk about masculinity, when we talk about male sexual abuse, there's different elements that come into it. We could talk about, you know, the gender aspect. We can talk
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
race aspect. One of the things that I was thinking about was actually age and generation. And in the world now, it feels like we have so many generations. The generations are getting smaller and smaller as we take into account technology and all of these things. And I wonder for you how the book can be used intersectionally and I want to use it specifically in the lens of age, because I think of the work that I do. I
Yeah.
work with 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, and they all have very different needs. And I think sometimes that reaction, in terms of the keep calm, carry on, to the self-diagnosing, to
Yeah.
the shout it from the rooftops, and putting everything on Facebook and everything in between. Like, actually, how do we work with all of these different ways people show up to the room, show up in their lives in an intersectional way?
Yeah, I think that's what an enormous question. I think the way I'm trying to answer a question about intersectionality without sort of picking any one example to say, how it impacts one
Mm,
group than or other, is I think perhaps where some of the literature about sexual abuse, particularly for men, has not addressed previously, is that uh, if there's one takeaway from the book, is that what has happened to a man before
mm,
the abuse, during the abuse, and after the abuse will have a big impact on either how they are able to find recovery or how some experiences will compound trauma. So sexual abuse rarely happens in a vacuum. So a man's life beforehand, whether that is peppered with poverty or discrimination or single parent house, whatever that might be, that
Mm,
will impact the experience of abuse and then how their life continues to go on beyond the abuse will also
mm,
impact how they experience the trauma of the abuse. Now,
yeah.
this can be cultural things. So, as you say, some cultures very much lean into the keep calm and carry on, some don't. But it can also mean systemic things. So, what does it mean to be a man of a certain group and try and access help from different establishments when we know there is systemic violence that is handed down to different men? So, what is it for, somebody to turn up to a health service or the criminal justice system to ask for something when we know these systems are flawed, when we know medical
Mm,
racism exists, when we know reports from the police can be homophobic? And even if men don't belong to a minoritized group, we also know that attitudes towards sexual violence and rape from some of these statutory organizations really lean into myths, into stigma. There's a report from 2022 that the majority of Met Police for rape was sort of unfortunate or what's the term? Hold on, let me find it. Regretful sex, rather than rape. And that if drugs or mental health issues were also involved, then that's not the police's job to be caretakers for that. So
yeah.
the intersectionality, I think, wants to bear in mind for a person's life journey, what happens before, during, and after, how those unique markers affect them culturally, personally, but also where that man sits within this society and how they may or may not be able to find support for recovery. So I think that's kind of where the book is interested in. And to sort of answer your question about different stages, what the book also tries to do is look at different developmental stages.
Yes, it does.
So abuse in childhood, in adulthood, and in adolescence. So these are things that are traditionally missing. So I think many books look at the experience of childhood abuse for men because we know that men are abused a lot in institutions like religious institutions or boarding schools or army or youth detention centers.
Yeah.
Or adulthood, adolescence, often really missed. We could spend a whole hour talking about adolescence. In fact, I have spent many hours talking about adolescence. So just for kind of the book trying to go, okay, things like the sexual self development, the development of shame, all of these things will be impacted by the developmental stage men were at when they were abused.
Yeah.
So that's another intersectional aspect that I think is so important to have in the zeitgeist when talking about this.
And I think just I'm thinking of the work that I've done and continue to do. There are the real threats that we need to consider if we're therapists, and it's not just that if we're therapists, if you get a disclosure from a friend, or there may be some people who have experienced this and are in a place where this is something that's in the forefront of their mind. But there is the reality. I'm thinking of me as a black man and the statistics that come with that. Um, I'm thinking of what has historically been shown on TV, and when I say historically, not that far behind. Why did you let it happen? Why would you let yourself be raped? Because a man should be strong enough to fight it off. So there's all these things going on that do make it different from when women are sexually abused, and that's not to diminish anything, that's just it, they're different things. And I think when we are working with someone, or those things to be considered, that actually there is a real world stigma, danger, aspects of opening up, and I think you have the statistics on how long it takes someone to disclose. Did you say something like 26? Am I making that up?
Yeah, when I was doing the group work, the average time it took for a man to disclose an abuse to anybody was 26 years.
Mhm.
And then I think they used Survivors Manchester. We Are Survivors is the new template. They did a follow-up survey. If a disclosure goes wrong,
Yeah.
how long do they wait before they disclose again? And that was an additional 13 years. So, so there's so many barriers for men when
Power of shame.
seeking shame. Yeah.
I mean, basically what you've said is the effect of shame can be 13 years.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the effect of shame is a prison, is a
Yeah.
life sentence. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. So we've sort of got 8 minutes, and I'm thinking, I'm surprised we filled the time. I was worried we wouldn't. And I guess what was a surprising revelation to you as you were like gathering information for this book and writing the book? Because I don't want it to just be about the information, the text, but the process of writing as well.
Yeah, I mean, surprising. I spent a lot of time, oh gosh. I spent a lot of time trying to find the right voice for it, I think. Often, you know this, I have a sort of chip on my shoulder about academia and things like this, which is, sort of I won't get into it with 7 minutes, but this kind of thing of who am I writing for? And that was questions around academia, questions around self-disclosing as a therapist that wants to use self-disclosure very surgically, questions about sort of exposure. I don't really, here I am talking to a lot of people, and what might that mean? And I think all of these felt like a really jumbled up kind of ball of anxieties and struggle. And so I think one of the real pleasures was working through that with you, with the other critical friends, and kind of finding a way to take my therapeutic voice or the voice I would use in a consultation or a lecture and be able to thread it into the book and it just start to feel more comfortable for me on the page because and then the goal became clearer and clearer that I really wanted this to feel like a relational experience, whether somebody has had years of therapy or is just, I mean, more realistically, I imagine considering therapy, but gosh, a book is safer than turning up to an office, getting on the train, on the bus, in the car, and you know, and for somebody to really get an authentic sense of me, and to hear my voice say, yes, I take you seriously, to go back to the previous point, I am impacted by my clients, and I want them to know that. I want people who read this to know that I am impacted by this topic, and hope that that is useful for therapists, for survivors, for loved ones of survivors, for researchers, to hope that that is something that can be effective and useful. So yeah, I think that's been one of the pleasant surprises to come out of it's sort of a ball of anxiety of going, God, I don't really know what I'm doing, to something that feels hopefully, and people will like it or they won't. In the same way, I'm the right therapist for some people, but not others. Yeah.
And I think it's important, you've written this book and, as a critical friend, it's an excellent book. and there's so much useful information. One of the questions was, do you have facts, data? Like 26 years in the book, there are facts and data in there. That's so important. There's
Yeah.
no point having a book that's just lovely words. Actually, we need some concrete stuff in there. There's two more questions, and one of them I feel you partly answered. This book is not just for therapists, it's for survivors, it's for allies. So anyone can pick this book up and get something from it.
Mm.
And so don't feel you have to be a qualified practitioner in order to engage with it. It can be for anyone who is interested in research, interested in the topic, or is going through something. As Jeremy said, some people it's too much to go into a room, but actually they can pick up a book and that can be the first step.
Yeah.
Um, I thought there was something else. There's a question about do you think we should look at this not as sexual abuse but violence, a violent attack on another person? And I wanted to give you an opportunity to answer that because I personally think there's a difference when it's both are terrible, but there's something different about sexual abuse. But I have my thoughts, and I just wanted to know what your thoughts are.
Sorry, what's the
The
question?
question is, do you think we should look at this not as sexual abuse, but violence, a violent attack on another person?
Well, I think it depends on what lens you want to look at it through. I think, the book talks about transformative justice, where, I would say sexual abuse rarely happens in a vacuum, and a transformative justice sort of philosophy would say violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. So I think, we can talk about sexual abuse as a byproduct of living in an unjust and violent society, absolutely, where violence is normalized in the patriarchy, violence is normalized in statutory services, violence is normalized in popular culture. So I think it can certainly come under the umbrella if we want to use that sort of political lens, absolutely. I think where perhaps we do need distinctions, I think sexual abuse, whether it is violent or not, and I mean it all is violent, but I think you know what I mean when I sort of distinguish the two. I think there is something uniquely devastating
Yeah.
about it. And I stand by. I think it rarely happens in a vacuum. I think often survivors have other traumas, you know, but I think there is something about it as a violating act of violence that is, yes, the lack of bodily agency, but there is also a need to dehumanize, to squash, yeah, to really take away humanity.
Mm,
I don't think I'm really happy to be challenged and change my mind, but I don't think at this point I would say all violence is about that, particularly
no,
with sort of male violence.
yeah.
Um, that's my immediate reaction to I think a really interesting question. Happy to sort of hold my hands up and say that's my first response rather than
Yeah.
uh, deeply considered.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off, I know it's 6 o'clock, but I'll just piggyback off that. I think you answer that really well. This idea of an umbrella of violence, and there's loads of things that are under that umbrella, and so there's almost if you think of a Venn diagram, there's meeting points, but I think there's things that are uniquely found in the area of sexual abuse that can't be connected to pure violence. As you said, sometimes quote unquote it's not violent, it can be coercive, it can be systemic, there's different ways, but of course it's all violent, so we're not diminishing,
Yeah.
but there's something unique about sexual abuse that I think is important to make sure it's distinct. Otherwise the insidiousness of it can get lost, the specific violence of it can get lost, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's not an accident. It's used in sort of in war zones. as a weapon to dehumanize and demoralize.
To break.
That it is deployed as a weapon. This is the severity of it on the psyche. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've come to the end.
Thank you, Olumide. I'm also really glad that we came dressed as mustard and ketchup. That was the one thing I wanted from today. So thank
We look
you.
like a boy band. We didn't coordinate.
Yes, we did. Stand up for the key change.
Uh, Thank you both so much. It's amazing how much was fit into that hour. And yeah, thank you for many different directions. Thank you for the vulnerability. Thank you for letting us in on your dynamic as well. I think it was really special to have it be such a back and forth. And also a really good example, I think, of men being vulnerable with each other and using it as a bit of a modeling exercise. So thank you so much. I've put the link to the book in the chat. I think there might even be like a follow-up conversation around this. So hopefully we could have you both back for another conversation with Task in some way, shape, or form, maybe another one of these, a podcast, etc. Because I feel like there's probably so much to say. And thank you for answering all the questions that were popping up.